one of the things we're starting to do more of is trying to do more outreach. And in the sense that we definitely send female brass artists out into the schools so that they can be seen. So trying to get in touch with the organization and perhaps ask for an outreach program of that kind is something that female band directors could do if they wanted to bring somebody in that their students would, appreciate the appearance of.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode number 30. My guest for this episode is Amy Cherry. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening and for your support. If you find value from the show and haven't already done so, please leave me a rating on iTunes. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and if you're really loving what you hear, you can even support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Mark J. Connor. Now, on to the episode. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Mark.
So, Amy, I know you. We were former colleagues and have become friends. And so can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. As you mentioned, my name is Amy Cherry. I am a trumpeter, currently a freelance musician and a teacher outside of Philadelphia. I live in the Westchester, Pennsylvania area. I'm an active chamber musician. I belong to a group called the Brandywine Brass Quintet. And I also have a duo with my husband, Dan Cherry. We have a trumpet-trombone duo called the Balaton Chamber Brass that we started back in 2010. And in addition to that, I am a longtime affiliate with the International Women's Brass Conference, and I currently serve as a board member and as the secretary of that organization.
Excellent. So, Amy, that's what I really want to talk about as we get through the interview here. But I want to kind of talk about your origin story, because one of the things I like about what I do with this podcast is finding out where everyone comes from. Because I find that as I listen to other podcasts and do my own interviews, is that we all sort of have similar stories that we share about our backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so I want to hear about you. What's your origin story? Where are you from, and how did you get started as a trumpet player?
Well, I've been thinking a little bit about what my my earliest musical inspiration may have been. And I can say that I'm a recovering PK. I'm a preacher's kid. So I grew up in church and spent a lot of time singing, kind of traditional Presbyterian hymn singing. But I think that was a pretty early part of just getting to know and to love music for me. I think the other kind of somewhat off-the-wall influence is that a large majority of my family attended The Ohio State University. And so as a kid, I grew up listening to recordings of that band. And the more I think about it, the sound of that and just kind of the love of that brass sound, I think played a big role in me going the direction that I went. I started initially as a pianist. I began when I was 5. I played piano from 5 all the way through college. And then when I was in 4th grade, it was time for me to pick an instrument. And unfortunately, at the time, I had braces. And I knew that I wanted to be a trumpet player. I had a cousin, his name is Scott Jones, and I wanted to be just like him. He was a trumpet player, so I knew that's what I wanted to do. But because of the braces, my band directors at the time really wanted me to steer away from brass instruments. So in the 4th grade, I ended up choosing flute. And I started with that. We lived in Kentucky at the time, and I played flute for a couple of years. Really didn't enjoy it that much, but I did it. And then in my 6th grade year, we moved, and I was very fortunate that we moved and relocated to Fairfax County, Virginia. And so when we moved in the middle of my 6th grade year, I showed up for band as a flute player. And then at the end of my 6th grade year, kind of said to myself, you know what, I don't really want to do this much anymore. I'd really like to play trumpet. So at the end of 6th grade, I went to my middle school band director and told him that when I appeared as a 7th grader, I was going to be a trumpet player. And he promptly laughed at me. So that served as a great motivation for me, actually. And when I showed up for his 7th grade band, within a period of 2 weeks, I was his principal trumpet player. So that's kind of how it started. And then went on from there. I was really lucky being in Fairfax County that I was a part of a great high school band program. I went to Herndon High School with Rich Bergman as my band director, and I got a chance to just play phenomenal music. We did a lot of transcriptions, played some great stuff, and I didn't really even know what it was at the time. I remember sitting down as a freshman, and I had landed kind of high in the section, and they put this part in front of me, and we started the piece, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm the only one playing. Why am I the only one playing? And it was pictures at an exhibition. And so we got to play great stuff like that, and had a lot of other wonderful opportunities through high school. We went to Midwest during my junior year of high school, and we were able to take with us Brian Bowman as our soloist to kind of play with the band. So just a lot of great opportunities from being in that particular region early on in my training.
Yeah, I guess so. Those are some great stuff in there, Amy. So
Yeah.
so I'm going to dig into a few of those if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So now you mentioned that you sang in the choirs as a child and that instilled your love in music. So did you have much musical training before that flute was forced on you?
Really just the piano.
Uh-huh.
The piano started in kindergarten, and I think it was more something that my parents just kind of decided our kids are going to be exposed to this, and you'll start it early, and you can quit, after a while if you want to, and I just never really wanted to. So I was happy to kind of practice and did some performances as a kid, did some other singing when I was really young. I remember it was a group called the Swing Singers. It was sort of like a community show choir, and I remember doing the song Sing. I don't know if you remember that from the 1970s. Doing that song kind of as a duet at a big state fair, that type of stuff. So I had those opportunities. And then the piano was really important to me. But I didn't have the outlet as a pianist to be able to work with other people. So I knew that I wanted to be in the band environment. It just took a little while for me to get to the right instrument.
So what carried over from the flute that allowed that quick transition to the trumpet? Nothing.
Well, I think
air.
The good part would be sort of the melodic aspects of it, perhaps the leading aspects of it. Being used to being heard and being kind of at the forefront, and knowing how to be responsible for those lines. But I would say like the detriment to me was just the act of having the flute and rolling that bottom lip under. That was actually something that I really had to fight to overcome during the first couple of years of trumpet playing, because my inclination when I would want to try it and play high was to let that bottom lip roll under, which caused a lot of problems. So there was some good in terms of the role of the instrument in the ensemble, and there was some challenging stuff as well.
How did you make that transformation? I know that you had the chip on your shoulder, but do you remember, were you practicing every day? Did you seek lessons? What happened there?
Let's see. I was pretty determined. So I did a lot of work that particular summer. I did a lot of work on my own. And I did have a teacher early on, maybe starting in 8th grade, I think. Ed Cooper was a local teacher. He'd kind of come to your house and work with you. So I worked with him for a while, and then was fortunate enough that he kind of said to me, I think we should move you to a different situation. And it was probably my freshman year of high school that I started working with Denny Edelbrock. And Denny was with the Army Band for many, many years and played with the Army Brass Quintet. And so he was a really, really influential figure in my development. Just a great teacher, a lot of energy, got you very excited and very motivated about what you were doing. And also had really high standards and expected a lot. So I was fortunate to work with him throughout high school. I also had, again, I had the outlet of the band, which had great music, but there was also another opportunity, and that was the Northern Virginia Youth Orchestra. So I played with them for my junior and senior year, I believe, of high school. And again, great music, great soloists, and opportunities to just hear some amazing stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So now when you went to college, you went to the University of Illinois, if I recall correctly?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So can you tell me about that and then your journey through your doctorate at Cincinnati Conservatory?
Sure. So I looked around at schools, and I initially felt that I was going to go into music education and follow the band directing track. And so I looked at a few different places and felt like my best opportunities were going to be at Illinois. And so I went out there, and I was a music education major for the first 2 years. And then I had an opportunity the summer after my sophomore year to go to Tanglewood. And I went as a part of the Empire Brass Quintet Seminar. So you go and you stay there for a couple of weeks, and you get to watch rehearsals of the Empire Brass, and then you get put into quintets depending upon your ability, and you get coached by them, or the Atlantic Brass Quintet was the other group that was in residence. So you had lots of people that were available to coach, and then you had chances to perform each week and do the rep that you had been working on. So that experience really kind of got me thinking about playing and making music perhaps in a different way than what I had thought I might end up doing. And it was then that I decided I was going to kind of leave the music ed track. I love teaching and will always love teaching, but I don't know that I'm necessarily designed to be a band director. I really appreciate one-on-one opportunities with the students. I love conducting brass groups, but it just wasn't feeling like it was the right fit. So when I went back to Illinois for my junior year, I switched out of the music ed track and into the performance track. So went on and finished that degree. And then in the last year of my time at Illinois, I did an independent study with Mike Ewald, who he and Ray Sasaki were the two trumpet instructors at Illinois at the time. And when I got a chance to work with Dr. Ewald on this independent study, we thought, well, what would be something that would be interesting? And we weren't very far from St. Louis at the University of Illinois. So he suggested that I take a series of lessons with Susan Slaughter. And that kind of, I would record the lessons, I would document them, and I would write a paper on that experience, and that would serve as my course of study. So I had an opportunity to do that, and worked with her, drove over to St. Louis and worked with her a couple of times. And it was kind of in the middle of that opportunity that she mentioned the idea of going on to do master's work, and she specifically mentioned Cincinnati to study with Marie Speziale. And so that was part of what led me to Cincinnati to do the master's degree.
That's awesome.
So I went there and did the master's degree for 2 years. I studied with Alan Siebert the first year that I was there and served as his teaching assistant. And then I studied with Marie the second part of the master's degree. I did go on and do the doctoral degree with breaks here and there. I went and taught at East Tennessee State for a year and then returned to Cincinnati to finish up coursework and did the rest of my studies with Marie while I was there.
All right. So let's talk about some trumpet things for a few minutes.
Okay.
So I guess the question I would ask any instrumentalist is the master question about if you had just a short amount of time to teach a student, what are the most important trumpet things that should be taught early on?
Well, when I start somebody who's new to me or relatively young, I think what I feel pretty strongly about is helping them make a sound that they can be proud of, and that they can kind of walk out of the lesson and think, okay, I know how to get to this point and I can do a little bit more work on my own. So I wouldn't say that I start with any particular type of rep or exercises or anything. It's really about looking at what they can do, listening to what they can do, and trying to help them make the most beautiful sound in the most efficient way possible, and to make sure that they're not kind of getting in their own way.
What's the most common beginner mistake?
Most of the time it has to do with breathing. I hear very frequently kids that will breathe and then sort of close the throat as they're getting ready to play. And you'll hear that kind of sound as they're articulating. So a lot of it comes from the idea of trying to tongue from way down in the throat. So that's something that I have had to spend some time with some kids on.
Sure. And if you had sort of one tip to give to maybe someone who's a woodwind specialist who's just starting out maybe in their first couple of years of band teaching brass, is there a tip that maybe you can sort of give them to help avoid that?
Well, we talk a lot about breathing. We'll do some breathing exercises, but also just thinking about taking in the breath with a particular shape of the mouth, either an ah or an o, something that's going to help get the tongue down and out of the way, and perhaps less likely to be involved in the articulation process, or at least so heavily involved. And then the other thing I try to do is I ask the students to kind of talk to me about, well, how do you tongue a note? One of the probably tenets of my teaching is that I like the student to kind of take on the role of teacher. So if we're trying to accomplish a skill and it's not quite where I think they can get it, I'll ask them to try to teach me what it is we're trying to accomplish. And sometimes when you do that, and the student will, I'll say, try to describe how you tongue a note. And if that student says to me, well, you put your tongue in between your teeth and then back and forth, then I go, oh, goodness. So it can be really eye-opening when you understand what their concept is about what they're trying to achieve. So one of the things that we'll talk about is just the idea of using just the very tip of the tongue instead of trying to think, of using the whole tongue. And we can get into a bigger discussion about this later because I've got some interesting thoughts on dialect and how that influences articulation. But I'll try to really just emphasize how little of a movement needs to happen and how it really needs to happen in the front of the mouth, and kind of get them to streamline things and work at it from that angle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you've piqued my curiosity about the dialect.
Well, I can just say that having lived and taught in some southern areas, if you ask somebody to pronounce the word the or something that just begins with a simple T, you're going to get a lot of variety. And I noticed, especially that year that I spent in Tennessee, there were challenges with my students being able to double tongue and just do the TK quickly. And I don't mean to, kind of make any stereotypes, but it just seemed to me that when I listened to speech patterns and I listened to kind of enunciation habits, that there are certain regions or dialects that maybe lend themselves better to different types of articulation styles. I know when I was studying for my master's and my doctoral degree, when I worked with Marie Speziale, she could speak some Spanish and she would talk an awful lot about the idea of what does Spanish sound like when it's spoken. It's very energetic. It's very far forward in the mouth. It's sort of like fireworks sometimes. And that is a very helpful thing for trumpet playing. And if you think about just the idea of what does Spanish sound like when it's spoken versus something like French or Russian and what's going on inside the mouth when you're dealing with those languages, I think it's just interesting to kind of talk to students about some of those differences because sometimes they can understand that. If they're taking a foreign language or if they're taking French or if they're taking Spanish, they might be able to think a little bit about what they're doing when they pronounce some of those words and maybe make the jump and kind of apply that to what they're doing with music.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, no matter where we come from, we all are looking for that ideal, that model sound on the instrument.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the IWBC. For those who don't know, and you mentioned it earlier, the IWBC is the International Women's Brass Conference.
Sure. The IWBC was founded in 1993, and it was started by Susan Slaughter, who was the principal trumpet player of the St. Louis Symphony. She's a remarkable individual, and she was the first woman to land a principal trumpet job in an American orchestra, and she held that post for many, many years. But she felt throughout the early part of her career that it was very difficult to connect with other women brass musicians. She just didn't really know many that were out there, and certainly felt like there wasn't any tool or organization or event where they could get together and do some networking. So that was kind of the primary motivation behind her starting the group. And she held a conference at Washington University in St. Louis in 1993, and was really pleasantly surprised and kind of overjoyed with the number of people that came. And so that led to another event that was held in 1996. And at the same time that second conference went on, she decided to form a brass choir made up of all women musicians. And so she dubbed that group, or came up with the name of the Monarch Brass Ensemble for that group. So that's a little bit about the background. We typically gather as a group about every 2 or 3 years. We don't have yet the regularity that you might see from like the International Trumpet Guild or the Horn Society or the Trombone Festival. We really only have our conferences every 2 or 3 years. And one of the things that I think is really special about the group is because we are inclusive to all the brass instruments, when we get together, it's a pretty big event, and there are some opportunities for some amazing music. It's not just like going to a Trumpet Guild event where mostly you're just going to hear trumpet. You get to hear some neat compositions, some great combinations of sounds, and just a wide variety of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so, how has that influenced, do you think, the world of brass playing as far as being more inclusive for women over the years?
Well, I think probably first and foremost, when you see things happening in society, it makes them a little bit easier to maybe strive for or to be able to achieve. So I think having the group of women together early on in 1993, 1996, and making that visible, I think probably said a lot to the generations that were just coming up. I remember I attended, I think maybe just a day of the 1996 conference. And I was just amazed because even being a student at Illinois, which was a very large school, I remember maybe 2 other female trumpet players. So I went over in 96 and was kind of blown away by the level of what was going on. And then the next conference after that was in 2000, and that was actually held at the University of Cincinnati while I was in school there. And I got to be a part of kind of doing some of the organizing and helping out. And again, it just came down to seeing these women play and having just not had that experience yet. And then getting to talk to them a little bit about what their career path has been, what their struggles are, and, recognizing that this person is not too dissimilar from me, and it just kind of opens up the doors of thought and thinking, okay, well, if they did that, then there's room for more of us to kind of come through the door and pursue some of these opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having role models, positive role models that girls can see playing brass instruments is really important.
Right.
And I think that's because I grew up just at that generation where it was becoming just normal.
Right.
And I think Susan Slaughter is a big part of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a really neat place to go. Obviously, there's a high level of talent that comes in to serve as the guest artist in some of the premier groups, but the people that come in to be a part of the lectures and the presentations and to be a part of the competitions, they just all bring so much stuff to the event, and that we can all kind of share. And I think the other big point that I really appreciate is that everybody seems accessible. And I don't know that if you walk into some of the other conferences that feeling prevails. But I definitely would say since Susan began the group, this idea of kind of reaching behind you and pulling those that are trying to follow is definitely something that we feel strongly about. So when you go to the IWBC conferences, what I find really kind of heartwarming is the idea that you can just network and walk up and talk with pretty much anybody. And and find a friend, find somebody who's maybe had a similar experience, and that just helps from a sense of support, but also from, again, kind of the business end of things, making those connections, making the networks that perhaps in the past would have been shut off to women. That really helps us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so many thoughts about this and so many things on my mind. And one of the things I want to just mention is that the president of IWBC is Joanna Ross Hersey. And
yes.
She's a tuba player, and she appeared on 2 episodes of another podcast by Andrew Hitz called The Brass Junkies. And she also talks about these issues. So I would urge anyone who's interested in this to also find that podcast. And so, Amy, I want to ask you, do you have any of the numbers of participation or any of the trends and numbers, or do you know those?
Directly related to IWBC?
No, just sort of participation, women brass players in professional orchestras. Or
I don't have any of those figures at hand. I think I did overhear Joanna talking a little bit about sort of the disparity between the different instruments, how horn players have a higher ratio of numbers of women. And she may have mentioned somewhere in the 25 to 30% professionally for horn players. I think she may have mentioned for trumpet players somewhere down in the 3 to 5% of professional trumpet players are women. But I don't.
How is it that low?
I don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with just opportunity.
I mean, I know how, but I mean, that was rhetorical.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this needs to change, obviously.
Well, and hopefully the more work that we do with IWBC, some of those things will change. So we have a lot of opportunities, and that's one of the things that Susan wanted to create when she started these conferences. She put together a competition. So one of the big events that we have every time we gather is a solo competition. And what's neat about what we do is that we offer competition categories for all of the instruments. And you start the competition competing just against your own kind. So it's a trumpet category, a horn category. We typically have a tenor trombone category and a bass trombone category and euphonium and tuba. So what's neat is that you start in that, pretty defined area of competing against people playing your same instrument. But when you reach the final round, we're taking the top winners of each of those instrument categories and then declaring a final prize. And so what Susan said about doing, there are 2 things that I would want to point out. One has to do with the age range of the competition. When we started this, we had 3 different age categories, and we've kind of morphed and the competition has evolved so that this past June, when we met at Rowan University, we had 2 age categories, and it's in the neighborhood of kind of 25 and below. You've got that first category, and then kind of 26 and above. And what we do that I really appreciate is there's no top end to the age limit of that higher category. And I think that's a pretty important thing, because most competitions, at least the ones that I have some experience or know something about, will typically put a cutoff age, maybe 30, maybe 35. But by not doing that, I think we've opened up the door to women whose career paths might not have followed a normal trajectory. And that's something that I'm pretty proud of that we do, because women's career paths usually don't follow a normal trajectory. And I think by not capping that, we allow some of those opportunities for, later in life artists. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that Susan felt pretty strongly about was the prize money, because the prize money can be really, really helpful. So this year we were able to increase the amount of the winnings to a point where the grand prize winner for each age category was receiving $5,000. So that's a pretty substantial award, and could really help someone's education and career development.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's terrific. So now that's the competition. You also mentioned earlier before we started recording about a scholarship.
Yes, we started something new. We have the Penny Turner Young Artist Award that's actually going to go out. It's going to be awarded the first time in 2018. We have a board member, Ginger Turner, who is a recently retired trumpet player with the Army Field Band. And she wanted to create a scholarship in memory of her mother, who passed away a few years ago. And so Ginger set aside a little pot of money, and we were able to get a match of that money from Dylan Music. And what we're going to do is annually give an award for a $400 gift certificate to Dylan Music. And the award will go to a young female brass musician, any instrument, between the ages of 12 and 18. And it will be done really on the basis of recommendation. So it would be up to a young student's private teacher or band director to write a letter to the committee suggesting and kind of nominating their student to win this award. And then by vote of a committee, we'll choose one winner each year and give them that $400 gift certificate to use at Dylan Music, either towards the purchase of an instrument, if that would be helpful, or for supplies or for music, however they need to make use of that.
And where can students apply for that?
Well, we are kind of undergoing a website renovation. So on November 1st, I expect, is when the new IWBC website will go up. And that's where you'll go to find this information.
Will that be at the same web address? Do you know?
I think they may do a little tweaking. So as of right now, you can go to myiwbc.org and learn all about the organization and see all of the things that we're up to. And then you should be able, through that site, to get notification about what you'll want to look for after November 1st.
Yeah, so band directors, steer your young female brass players.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so how about your next conference? You said you just had one this summer at Rowan University. Where's the next one?
We are going to be holding our 2019 conference at Arizona State University.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Deanna Svoboda is going to be the host, and we're very fortunate in that she's actually done this before. She hosted an event for us back in 2012. She and Lynn Folk at Western Michigan put on a fantastic event. So she's got a lot of experience with this. She's got a lot of wonderful resources at Arizona State, and we expect it's going to be a great event. And then we're starting to generate a lot of interest, so we can thankfully say and happily say that we know where the next two conferences are going to be. So 2019 is going to be at Arizona State, and 2021 is going to be at North Texas with Natalie Mannix, a trombone professor. So things are moving ahead, and we're very excited to be able to kind of make those commitments and do a lot of pre-planning for those and make those some awesome events.
Yeah, I'm sure they will be. Man, Arizona State gets mentioned on this podcast more than almost every other university. I should ask them for sponsorship. It
pops up a lot.
It does pop up a lot. Well, it's a big school.
So, and while we're still talking about them, about IWBC, I can just add, if any of your listeners have, again, never heard about us or looking for a way to support the group or learn more about the group, one of the primary fundraising activities that we do is we hold holiday concerts. They're called the Holiday Brass Concerts. And Susan Slaughter actually hosts 4 of these concerts in St. Louis. They've gotten really popular, and they sell out pretty quickly. But it's primarily local brass players. They typically involve some church choirs from the region. So we have the concerts in St. Louis, and then Ginger Turner in Baltimore also hosts an event, and she includes a steel drum group from a local high school. So it's a great community event, huge crowd, wonderful music, sort of get you in the holiday spirit. So if you're curious about those concerts, if you're anywhere near St. Louis or Baltimore and you'd like to try and attend, you can go to the IWBC website and click on the Holiday Brass link, and that'll give you some information about exactly when and where those events are going to be.
St. Louis has a wonderfully vibrant brass community.
Yes.
We have the St. Louis Low Brass Collective, which includes many low brass players, including the trombones of the St. Louis Symphony. And I just think it's a great brass community in the area. Probably because of great people like Susan.
Right. A good history.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Amy, thanks for all that. I appreciate your work with IWBC and that organization. It's something that I think is really important. And I want to
thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, just thank you for letting me share a little bit about it.
Of course. So I want to ask you about the my final questions that I ask everybody.
Okay.
And so what's your favorite work for wind ensemble or band?
That's a tough one. I would say that when I was at Illinois, I feel like I had a lot of opportunities to do fantastic stuff. I was actually thinking about this the other day. One of the more memorable experiences I had was that we did a performance and also a recording of a Lincoln portrait, which is a great piece, but our narrator at the time happened to be William Warfield, who was on the faculty at Illinois when I was there. And so that was just kind of a very memorable experience. I was lucky to get to work with a lot of conductors, and so I think what sticks in my mind are some of the experiences, like Harry Bejan conducting Praise Jerusalem and, those types of things. But I'm really drawn to Granger. So, and we did a fair amount of that at Illinois. So I love those types of pieces and just kind of really appreciate the liveliness of that.
Yeah, the running joke that on the podcast is becoming "Don't say Lincolnshire."
Oh, I didn't say it.
You just said Granger.
Yeah, I know.
My radar went up there.
I was broad. So, but yeah, I mean, we did a lot of great stuff. And then when I went on to Cincinnati, there were opportunities there as well. The first year that I was there, I think, was Eugene Corporon's last year, but I was lucky enough to get to do one of his recording projects. And the big piece on kind of the center of that recording was the Hindemith Symphony in B-flat. And I got to do the cornet solos on that. So that's kind of a special piece for me as well.
Yeah, that's something, that piece.
Yeah.
All right. So from where you sit, what are the challenges that we're facing as music educators and even just musicians as we move through the 21st century?
I think it's a necessary but really challenging question. And I think my experiences have given me, a couple of different windows into that. I'm fortunate enough to be a mom. I've got two wonderful kids, and they, because of where we live right now, they have some amazing opportunities. And I think nothing against the state of North Carolina where you and I met, but had we stayed there, I don't think they would have had some of the musical opportunities that they're getting to do now. I mean, specifically, I think geography plays a really big role in this. Where we were in North Carolina, there were no public string programs.
Yeah.
Since we came here, my daughter was able to start viola in third grade, and I think that's going to be with her for a while. So I think one of the big issues just has to be with access and where you are and kind of what you can get your hands on. So that's something to consider. One of the other perspectives I feel that I have comes from the years that I taught music appreciation classes. And so I taught them in a college setting to kids that were there not necessarily because they really wanted to be, but to sort of fill a gen ed curriculum credit. And they came with all manner of musical experience, most of them with very little musical experience. So it was difficult to kind of talk to them about the merits of classical music when they really had never heard any of it before. And it just became more obvious to me year after year of teaching that class that trying to introduce people to this music when they were 18 was way too hard.
There's no
and
question that.
and that we really needed to try to get music into the ears of people at a much earlier age. And I think now, the more studying and playing and teaching that I've done, I think we really have to get instruments into the hands of kids early on. I mean, nothing against general music classes, but there's something about the act of making your own sound that I don't ever want to get lost. I tried to teach music to the college kids whose steady diet of programmed music, of synthesized music and auto-tuned music is kind of what they grew up on. And so the idea of hearing a natural, organic sound of an instrument was really new to a lot of them. And I think that's unfortunate. So I think trying to promote the act of making your own sound as early as possible, be it singing or piano and this is another thing that we could talk about, a lot of programs that I'm aware of in this Philadelphia area that do wonderful music education things outside of the public school system. They're fantastic. I mean, there's a program called Play On Philly. There's a Tune Up Philly. Some of them are based in sort of the El Sistema tract and using that community music opportunity. But so many of them are string-based because the kids can start so young. And so that's a challenge that maybe the band community faces, not being able to get the kids to do the band instruments until 4th, 5th, or 6th grade.
Yeah.
Even that might be a little bit too late. So I'm a strong advocate for having them create their own sound, because that helps them connect to their bodies, to their ears, and their concept of what they want to sound like. And I think it's just a really important part of the whole process.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. As I watch my kids grow up, and you see how much television and the computer and just things that are external influences, are on them. And we try to steer them away from that, but it's still ever present and omnipresent. And so it's definitely a concern.
Right.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I wrote an essay a while back, kind of reflecting on the experiences and that I was having with my college students, but at the same time, my kids were of the age where they were watching like shows like Dora the Explorer and other things. And I swear that Dora's voice was auto-tuned, and so you're seeing your kids are watching these cartoons and they're not even getting kind of an authentic vocal experience in that environment. So it's just a little scary. I'm all for the natural sound.
So, Amy, this has been great. So I want to ask you one more question in my battery of questions, and that's, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
My 20-year-old self. I would probably say, don't be afraid to take risks. I was always a little bit of a rule follower. I don't know if that has to do with being a preacher's kid or not, but don't be afraid to take risks and sing more. I did the singing as a kid, but I didn't push sort of, exploration of sight singing or improvisation as much as I wish that I would have had in my early training. And I think that's really important. I'm married to a trombone player who is also a singer, and I listen to him sing, and we try to get the kids singing, as much as we can. And I just think that's a really helpful, expressive tool that can be really personal, but it can be communal, and there's a lot to benefit from it.
I agree. I just had my class today in oral skills, improvise. Mm-hmm. Just on basic solfege. It's just first semester, so they're just improvising on a major scale, just do kind of stuff. But I told them at the end that improvising to me is the most important skill that they can learn.
Yes, because
it's the creativity you carry around with you.
Yeah,
that informs everything else you do as a musician.
Absolutely, and so that would have been more helpful for me early on, and it'll be a steady diet of what I try to consume the rest of my career.
Yeah, I'm preaching to the choir. Someone out there is giving me an amen out there. All right, Amy. So knowing that we are at the end of September 2017, is there anything that you'd like to talk about or promote?
Let's see. Just in terms of what we talked about with the International Women's Brass Conference, just trying to get to the website, let your listeners know that this is a group that has a lot of wonderful goals and is doing some amazing work, and let them know about the upcoming holiday concerts that are going on. They generally happen the last week of November, kind of right after Thanksgiving. So to look for those, and then also a reminder to look for the scholarship, the Penny Turner Young Artist Award, that will have information about it on the website. Just keep an eye on what that group is doing over the next couple of years. We've had great opportunities for the Monarch Brass Ensemble to do some pretty important public performances. They got to go to the International Trumpet Guild back in 2015. They performed at the International Trombone Festival in 2016. And then in December of 2016, this is where I saw you actually in Chicago, they played at Midwest. And we hope to be able to do some more high profile performances and perhaps down the road make another CD that would not only get the sound of the group out there, but also would promote some of the women composers, which is another thing that we feel pretty strongly about.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So Amy, how can people hear you play?
You can, if you go to Facebook and you look up the Balaton Chamber Brass, you can find out some information about us. We have a CD called Changing Times and Colors, which is out on the Albany label. It's a project that we put together just a few years ago of all new music for trumpet, trombone, and mostly piano. And it's just kind of a collaboration of people that we've met and worked with in the past. So some very interesting stuff on that CD. So you can look for me there, or maybe hear me around Philadelphia sometime.
Perfect. Amy, thanks so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time.
All right. Take care.
All right.